All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania. And my research focused on mapping out a part of the neurobiology of addiction and anxiety. And a topic came up the other day regarding whether COVID-19, or the virus that causes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, has any effects on the brain. So I thought it might be worth briefly discussing because a study came out just a few days ago, actually, that shed some light on this dynamic, or potentially does. So this was a paper from a group at the University of Washington and the Oregon Health and Science University, which are both absolutely stellar biomedical institutions. And it was published in Nature Neuroscience, which, just to be totally clear, is one of the most prestigious journals in which a group of scientists can publish, particularly in neuroscience, of course. And so the inspiration for a study like this is due to some of the sort of strange symptoms that some people exhibit after being infected with the virus and testing positive, some of which are redolent of neurological pathologies, things like seizures, confusion, visual impairments, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting, and ataxia, or the loss of full motor control, hemiplegia, which is paralysis of one side of the body, stroke, and perhaps most famously, the loss of the sense of taste and smell. And in fact, I personally know a few people now who've reported that specific symptom, who ended up testing positive for COVID-19. And they didn't really even have significant flu-like symptoms, no severe cough or an alarmingly high fever, just the anosmia or the loss of smell and potentially taste as well. And so I know some people who've tested positive to only have symptoms of like a severe cold. So there's something funky, and they don't, lose their sense of smell or taste. And so there's something kind of funky about this virus that causes such divergent reactions to infection. And so what's with these neurological symptoms? After all, our initial understanding of the virus was that it's essentially a respiratory virus. That, like other respiratory viruses, it causes coughing and fever because it infects the same parts of the body that viruses like influenza or the viruses that, cause the common cold do. So one theory, and perhaps the most widely embraced theory, is that the virus elicits indirect effects on the central nervous system through all the inflammatory responses, of the immune system to the virus. And, you might recall that phrase cytokine storm. And so a cytokine storm is basically, it's describing a point at which a certain part of the immune system, the innate immune system, pretty much has like a runaway effect, where, the weapons that the innate immune system, deploys to attack a pathogen are going like way overboard. And I don't want to get too much into the differences between, the innate and adaptive immune systems, but, we're basically talking about the differences between the parts of the immune system that will attack anything in the body that doesn't seem like it's a part of the body, compared to the other part of the immune system, or another part of the immune system that recognizes, or that actually generates cells and antibodies that specifically recognize a specific pathogen. B cells and T cells, that's adaptive immunity. Macrophages, natural killer cells, basophils, eosinophils, that's innate. That's the innate immunity. And there's other types of cells as well, don't get me wrong. So another theory, though, as opposed to this sort of runaway inflammatory reaction causing indirect effects on the brain, another theory has been that, the virus may be capable of having direct effects on the nervous system, at least in some cases. After all, we've seen cases of encephalitis or, inflammation in the brain in some COVID-19 cases. And that, on top of all the symptoms that some people with COVID-19 present, suggests that it's possible that there's a more direct effect on, of the virus on the nervous system, the central nervous system. And so far, mRNA, or like the genetic material that the SARS-CoV-2 virus generates, has been recovered from cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, of COVID-19 patients. And so CSF is the sort of like salty water that circulates through the spinal cord and the ventricles of the brain, which you can see over there. It sort of bathes the brain and spinal cord, and generally speaking, if a substance is in the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, it's either been inside your brain or it can end up in the brain, or the central nervous system. And so if you're wondering what CSF is like, it'd be sort of similar to what like tears are like. All right, so moving on. So mRNA has been found in the CSF. So moving on, there's evidence that the closely related coronavirus that caused the SARS epidemic in the early 2000s was able to access the central nervous system. And so, all this to say that there's reason to wonder whether SARS-CoV-2, again, the virus that causes COVID-19, has the potential to directly affect the central nervous system, including the brain. And so that's what this group is interested in, and they focused on a specific product of the virus, the spike protein, or S protein, which you can see, here. You can see, the sphere with lovely little spikes that decorate its surface, right? There are a few components to the COVID-19 particle, but likely the most famous are those little red blobs, that stick out from that central sphere. Those are the S proteins, which are the spike proteins. And so, these images, So these images are from an even more recently published study, I think like 2 days ago or yesterday, that provide us with the most detailed characterization of the spike protein that I've ever seen. And so, why is this worth our attention? Well, so as the authors note, viral proteins, meaning, not the entire virus, but parts of the virus, have been shown to be able to enter the central nervous system, which of course, again, includes the brain. But more importantly, if one protein that's produced by a virus is able to gain access to the central nervous system, it's possible that, this specific part of the virus may in some cases enable the entire virus to gain access to the central nervous system, and that wouldn't even be necessary for some kind of significant reaction to the presence of just a component of the virus. So, I say they focused on the spike protein. They actually focused on a specific part of the spike protein. Technically, it's the S1 component of the protein, and so each spike protein is composed of 3 parts, a trimer. And so you can think of it sort of like a stool with 3 legs, right? It's not worth getting into the details, but like the one on which they focused is what enables viral particles to bind various parts of the cells that compose our bodies, which ultimately is what enables the virus to infect us. And so you can sort of see just under that C, I guess here, that triangle shape is divided into 3 colors. That's what I'm talking about the protein being composed of 3 different parts. And once again, this is very beautiful work that will almost certainly help us understand how viruses in general interact with our biology on a much deeper level, particularly coronaviruses. And so this study of whether the SARS-CoV-2 virus can gain access to our central nervous system focused on just one of the colors of that triangle shape, the S1 protein. And again, the S1 protein is what binds components of our cells throughout our body to enable the virus to infect our cells. So this lab had been largely focused on understanding, this lab that published this study, had been largely focused on the effects of the HIV virus, which causes AIDS, the effects of that virus on the brain. And HIV has been appreciated to cause some neurological repercussions independently of like the immunological effects. And the lab wondered whether a similar mechanism might be underlying the ability, a similar mechanism that underlies the ability of HIV to affect the brain might also characterize SARS-CoV-2. So we know at a minimum it binds something called the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, so ACE2. Just like the earlier coronavirus that caused the initial SARS outbreak in the early 2000s. But there's data to suggest that it can bind other parts of our body as well, SARS-CoV-2 can. And so here's what this group did. So they specifically evaluated what happens when, that specific protein, the S1 protein, what it can do if it's introduced to the circulatory system of a fellow mammal, the mouse, right? And so the authors note that the spike proteins, those little red blobs on the surface of the viral particles, are often separated from the viral particle itself by specific parts of our cells called proteases. Basically, like the spike proteins of the virus can be cleaved, and from that central sphere, and then they can go off to interact with the body on their own, right? And so they labeled that part of the spike protein in a way that enabled them to basically track where it ended up throughout the body, and found that it ended up being detectable within the brain, and in fact detectable throughout the brain. And they assessed a pretty wide variety of brain regions, and unsurprisingly, the olfactory bulb ended up with the highest concentration of the protein relative to other anatomical structures that they tested, after introducing the virus intranasally, right? So the olfactory bulb is the anatomical structure that's devoted to smell and taste, and so a high concentration of this S1 protein in the olfactory bulb isn't particularly surprising. But they also found evidence of the protein throughout the rest of the brain as well, suggesting that the protein may be able to bypass the blood-brain barrier and, gain access to the brain and potentially result in an infection of the brain. Not necessarily just that protein. That protein can have its own effects, but if that protein can bypass the blood-brain barrier, it's possible that SARS-CoV-2 can. So interestingly enough, and again, it wouldn't be necessary for the viral particle to gain access to the brain, bypass the blood-brain barrier, or the BBB, for there to be negative repercussions. If just the S1 protein gets through, that could be enough to cause some odd repercussions. So we know that COVID-19 tends to affect men more than women, and interestingly, this study found similar results with mice, with male mice showing greater uptake of the viral protein than females. So, so far we've seen that males tend to get COVID-19 more frequently than human males, more frequently than human women. Of course, that could, and very likely is, or at least in part, be attributable to men having a greater tendency to engage in risky, imprudent behavior. But some of the data of this study suggests that there may be some capability of this S1 protein to interact with biological components of males that results in an increased capability of the virus to infect cells. And so, to be clear, these are like super preclinical data, right? I get the sense that this group, here's how I think this study actually went down. I get the sense that this group knew someone at two separate companies, knew people at separate companies, because they got these spike proteins from two different companies. And they knew that those companies could produce this protein and worked with whatever mice they had available, because they did some interesting studies, evaluations of the potential effects of this protein on mice that have a gene that's basically one of the most closely associated with Alzheimer's disease. So why test that, but, arguably it's, because of the interest in comorbidities, but that just, sort of shop talk a little bit. I think that's probably how this study came to pass. But anyways, I think this is the first bit of evidence that, the first bit of convincing evidence that a component of this virus, at least, is able to gain access to the central nervous system and the brain. And in which case, this is just one more reason that you really want to avoid getting exposed to this thing if you can. And I do think it's worth acknowledging that this lab, which may have identified part of the reason that some people experience these odd neurological symptoms, was only able to do so because they had developed expertise by studying a different virus, HIV. So the investments that we've all made, as U.S. citizens, in understanding the basic biology of a totally different, unrelated virus, may help us to understand and potentially prevent some really severe neurological reactions to COVID-19, moving forward. And so, I'm basically making a hard sell for the investment in just basic biomedical research, not applied, not private sector research necessarily, although that's important too, but just the pursuit of a deeper understanding of how viruses and just biology in general really work at a fundamental level, right? Because who knows when it's going to pay off, and this very well could pay off and result in, the people you love not developing, rather severe neurological symptoms on top of, severe, immunological reactions. Okay, that's what I got for you today. I hope you're all staying healthy, safe and sane, as sane as you can. So let's start the live half. And hey, Joy. Hey, Hal. Oh, thanks for joining. Good to see you. Yeah, it's a sort of a short one, sort of a short one today, but it's a cool little, I think intuitive study. All right. I have a bit of a spiel for Periscope right now. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania in neuroscience, and my research focused on mapping out part of the neurobiology of addiction and anxiety. And before I get into what I discussed on YouTube today, involving a new finding regarding the effects of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, on the brain, I wanted to briefly bring up some news about this platform, our beloved platform, that we got last week. So evidently, Twitter is going to be shuttering Periscope, which is, the primary platform I've used to interact with people all over the world, discussing topics in neuroscience, biomedical science, philosophy, some of the topics that are really nearest and dearest to my heart. And so I started using the platform as a fledgling PhD candidate in neuroscience, and I was absolutely floored by how interested people were in talking about these issues, the issues that convinced me to become a scientist. And I've been deeply, deeply grateful for the opportunity to chat with folks about these things, particularly when folks would share their stories, their personal experiences, personal challenges, their insights, passions, and even their family tragedies. I've had the opportunity to form friendships with people who I'd never been able to meet all over the world, with whom I've had some of the most interesting conversations I've ever had. I learned so much from these conversations, and I'm 100% certain that it has made me a better, more curious, more informed scientist. And, you know, I'll never forget these experiences, and I'll be eternally grateful. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, or probably the center of my limbic system, if we're being sticklers about it. But, you know, this experience changed my life in a very real, very fundamental way. So for the past few months, I've been working on sort of video podcast thing on YouTube, along with my activity on this platform, where I talk about a specific topic for about 20 minutes or so, and then follow it up with a live conversation, right, that I've enjoyed so much. It's been a lot of fun, and it's given me the chance to explore a wide variety of topics with some images and videos that help to enrich the discussion. And so there's something very human about this real-time conversation that I think can't be replaced with prepared videos. So if you're interested in sustaining these real-time conversations, you can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/anthropoid, and you can find the link in my profile on this platform. So, I'll be popping on here for the next several weeks, but evidently only a few weeks remain. So I hope to see you there. So, all right. Thanks for indulging me. I appreciate it. And we're getting a call. Awesome. Let's see if we can connect. All right, Roy, I think we're connected. Well, is that your name, and where are you calling from?
Yeah, Ian, I've been on here a few times before. I'm from Dover in England.
Right on. Yeah, okay. And what's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, did you pass all your exams and everything?
Oh, yeah. That actually, I think a friend of mine reminded me that it almost a year ago to the day I graduated. Yeah, as a PhD. Yeah.
I know it's a bit late, sorry, but I remember you coming on saying that you were going through your exams and stuff. And how are you finding it now then? Did you get yourself a job and all that?
Yeah. So I'm working for the past several months, I've been working as a science advisor to the state government of New Jersey.
You probably can't remember when I was talking about fear and serotonin and all that. It was a while ago, so... I
recognize your name, but you'll have to forgive me for forgetting the topics we discussed.
No, it's not a problem, because I've been on loads of your scopes, but not so much the last year. But so like I teach on anxiety, and you were like saying, exactly what you were saying, Roy was right. You were helping people with stress, anxiety, nervousness, and worry. Explaining to them, teaching them that it's all worry, it's all fear, and it lowers your serotonin, and it can affect your autoimmune system. So that's been going really well. So are you still in agreement with that?
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. So I'm still doing it, but I'm trying to get it like teaching together, because your front lobe is where you make your decisions, isn't it? Right or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, decisions arise from, a constellation of brain regions, but for sure the frontal cortex, the frontal region is critical to like prudent decisions, like long-term planning and, avoiding sort of impulses, avoiding, just controlling your urges a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, without a frontal lobe, somebody will cease to resemble human behavior.
Yeah. So that's what I've been concentrating on, really, and explaining to people that, because a lot of people don't see that stress is fear, right? So when you teach them that, because it's like you just don't know if you don't know, eh? It's like,
of course,
when you went through all that teaching, what you went through, and hopefully that's going to be helpful for mankind, because I know that's what your heart was, wasn't it? It was to try and help understand and help other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Principally it's to understand human consciousness, but ultimately the goal is to reduce human suffering.
Absolutely. And obviously, with the pandemic and everything, what's going on around now, it's helpful, because I do meet people who are suicidal at the moment, you know what I mean? And it's all thoughts. And just trying to get the serotonin levels up. So, yeah, it's lovely to see you on here, and I'll be listening in a little bit.
Oh, thanks a lot, man. Great to hear from you.
And you. Take care.
You too. Oops. No. Okay, there we go. Gosh, I got butterfingers today. So, by the way, I should note that on youtube.com/anthropoid, I just talked about some evidence that a part of the, some pretty good evidence that a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 can actually gain access to the brain, can pass the blood-brain barrier. That has a couple ramifications and a couple potential, interpretations. But this might help us to understand the people who develop, things like stroke, like confusion, like dizziness, like the loss of taste and smell, even for long periods of time. Some since like the beginning, of the outbreak of the pandemic, people still months and months later, sustain these symptoms. So, and it there are a couple other potential ramifications. So if you're interested in that topic, check out. Oh, I still have my my YouTube at youtube.com/anthropoid. You can also get it through my profile on this platform on Periscope. What type of mental illness do liberals fall under? All right, this has been the optimal use of Periscope. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Amanda. I had COVID-19 in March, and now I'm experiencing brain fog. In March. My doctor doesn't know what I should do. Edward, yeah, so that topic, they're sort of informally, people who have COVID-19 symptoms for months and months and months after, these sort of classic symptoms like, severe cough and fever have abated, long haulers. That is a whole sort of domain of research right now. And the reality is I haven't seen really any good explanations. It is sort of baffling because there's not evidence that, COVID-19 can achieve latency like some other viruses can. Like, for example, the herpes simplex virus can remain latent for many, for a very long time and then all of a sudden recur when your immune system's guard is down. There's not evidence that COVID-19 does that or SARS-CoV-2 does that. But there is enough evidence of people describing experiences like yours that suggest there's something else going on here. There's sort of a scramble. There's sort of a scramble to understand that. And honestly, I think I detect a bit of frustration among people that we don't know more about COVID-19, and I totally understand that. But there was but the reality is the pace of discovery when it comes to COVID-19, let alone the pace of the development of vaccines, which is just unbelievable. We're talking like 10 years down to like 10 months in terms of how long it can take to make a vaccine. But the pace of discovery has just been like breakneck, just whiplash. So it'll just be a matter of time before we understand what is going on with these long haulers, and it's just another reason you do not want to catch this thing. Major bummer about Periscope. Yeah, man. Yeah, it is too bad. But again, the thing that I liked about this platform, or that I like about this platform, is that I think it's just a much more human interaction where the comments are part of the discussion. It's not like they're this separate component, and for me it's like what drives the whole experience. But YouTube has live streaming capabilities and comment streams. So if you're interested, youtube.com/anthropoid. Thank you, Joy. South Jersey here. Awesome. Philadelphia over here, if you can't tell. Do you think our brain will have chips in the future? Joshua Ethan. Yeah, awesome topic. The short answer is yes. But, the word future is doing a whole lot of work right there. I should note, in certain cases, there are brains walking around today with chips in them. So, particularly people who are suffering from Parkinson's disease have, I say chip. It's like, it's not really like what you're referring to, like a hard drive or something like that, or like something from Cyberpunk 2077, where you just plug something in and you get this data overlay. Like, we're not there, but, is that a viable, possible future? Yeah, totally. And here's why. At the simplest level, human consciousness emerges from the brain. The brain, just like everything you see around you, obeys the laws of physics. The laws of physics, at least many of them, are able to be manipulated and interacted with to achieve certain goals. And computers also obey the laws of physics. And so the only thing that's preventing us from being able to, develop something like a Neuralink, which I've talked about on YouTube a few times now, youtube.com/anthropoid. The only thing that's preventing us from achieving a whole brain computer interface that would enable, I wouldn't even have to be saying these words. It's kind of frustrating when you think about how long you have to wait for me to get this thought out. I could just immediately you get a sense of what I'm trying to convey. The only thing that's preventing us from realizing that maybe utopian, maybe dystopian future, depending on Your perspective is just a lack of knowledge. But we'll, if there's one thing that humans are good at, it is generating knowledge. All right, jazz hands. Emotions are an integral part of decision making. Yes, thank you, Daryl. I couldn't have said it better myself, and I think you know that. I am an emotion mood chauvinist. I think that that it is probably one of the most underrated components of human behavior. It affects every single experience you have, mood and emotion. Every experience you have, every memory you have, every decision you make. Okay, vaccines, DNA, alien. I don't know what that means. No, the vaccines were made. This is a remarkable story. The story of how these vaccines have been created, not once but twice in the United States. But then, of course, other vaccines. I can't remember if the vaccine out of the UK is an RNA vaccine, is RNA based. I don't think it is mRNA based. I think it's one of the more old school style, more tried and true, reliable, totally worthwhile and valuable. But mRNA vaccines were just not a thing. I mean, well, they were a thing in theory, but they had never been deployed, and so yeah, no, it's not aliens that created these vaccines. It is very brilliant scientists at two separate institutions. All right, we are getting a call. Is it Pfizer in the UK? I thought it was Oxford, but I'll take your word for it. So it looks like we are connected. Ragnar, I believe is your name. Where are you calling from? Oh, lost Ragnar. That's too bad. I really like that name. Okay, have you heard of Hap TV? It's kind of like Periscope. I think I have, actually, but I haven't really explored it. I'll thank you. I'm going to write that down. Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. I write so slowly. It's like unbelievable. It's like single finger pecking on the keyboard, but writing. We should talk about Woodrow Wilson's brain sometime. Yeah, so I believe it was Woodrow Wilson who was actually infected by the influenza virus that caused the earlier pandemic that we've all studied, and he was evidently like pretty severely affected by it and probably spread it to other world leaders, and so yeah. All right, how to study neuroscience in the USA if you're a foreign medical graduate? Oh, weeds and flowers. I mean, well, there's a couple ways. So first of all, assuming that you have an MD. I learned all of my tissue culture skills. The first bacteria I ever grew, or the first kidney HEK cells, and what was the other one? HeLa cells, HELE, derived from one person. That some of the most important cells in biomedical science, just one person. I think that, and they are technically immortalized, but I think that is a wonderful way to achieve immortality, is to be like just critical to biomedical science. Anyways, I was taught by somebody from Iran. She was an MD, I believe actually an MD PhD from Iran, and she did a postdoc in Nottingham in the United Kingdom, and then came to the US at my former institution, Baylor College of Medicine. She was brilliant. She was studying Parkinson's disease. And so basically all this to say, if you're interested in participating in neuroscience research and you have an MD, totally possible. It's probably a little bit more difficult than if you have a PhD, just because obviously the training is different. The professional networks are obviously going to be different. But if you have, skills, lab skills, you can, apply for postdoctoral fellowships pretty much everywhere. And assuming that you have some skills that a lab needs, and that's applicable to PhDs as well, but assuming that you know how to do tissue culture or, whatever, I don't know what kind of research you'd want to do. Neuroscience is a very big field. Or if you want to participate in like more clinical sort of, more applied neuroscience, like more clinical focused neuroscience, which I don't necessarily recommend, but, every lab wants an MD. Now, I don't know what every lab that does that kind of work needs essentially an MD to collaborate at least. And so, what I would do, here's what I would do if I were in your position, and is go online, think of where in the United States you might want to live, and cast a pretty broad, wide net, because it's there's not that many positions in advanced neuroscience, but California has a ton of institutions. Massachusetts has a bunch. Pennsylvania has a bunch, which is where I got my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. You get the point. Go through these states with many institutions, and then go to their neuroscience websites and just look at the professors, the researchers there, see what projects are interesting to you, and then just literally email, find the administrator or the lab manager or some kind of staff kind of position. You can find the administrator of a department, but the best way to do it would be to go directly to a lab and email them and say, hey, I am an MD, I was trained X, Y, and Z, this is my experience, this is what I know how to do in the lab, and I'd love to come, I love what you're doing, and I'd love to participate. Here's some ideas that I have. If you have ideas for studies, that is excellent. And then finally, if you say, hey, I'll apply for funding, I'll apply for, K99 or something like that, that you should be able to find a lab, again, assuming that you have the skills necessary, that will be interested in taking you on as a postdoc. I look French. I think I do have some French background, but I'm just American. What do you know about serotonin syndrome and B12? Sugar tits. So for anybody that's not familiar, so serotonin is a monoamine neurotransmitter. It regulates a wide variety of aspects of consciousness, from dreams to appetite to mood, a variety of sensory perception, and it has a ton of different types of serotonin receptors. But generally speaking, serotonin levels sort of fluctuate, between around here and here, right? You don't have crazy, unless you take some kind of substance like MDMA. You usually don't get these giant spikes of serotonin levels, which, by the way, would not be pleasant. I think there's a misunderstanding that if you can just crank up serotonin levels, that'll cure depression, or that'll make you feel better. That's just not the case. Depending on where serotonin level, the brain's a big place, 86 billion neurons, and if you have a rise in serotonin in one part of the brain, that might be, pleasant. But if you have a rise in serotonin levels in a different part of the brain, that could be severely unpleasant. So, just sort of that level of nuance. Same goes for dopamine as well. Same goes for every neurotransmitter. Anyways, so serotonin syndrome, generally speaking, arises when somebody has combined a couple substances or has taken an overdose of a substance that increases serotonin concentrations. Frequently, it's when somebody combines two drugs that increase serotonin levels and in two different ways, which therefore causes people to develop, to reach very, very high levels of serotonin, which essentially causes seizure. And it can be actually quite dangerous and damaging to the brain. So B12, I assume you're referring to vitamin B12. I'm not aware of any specific role of vitamin B12 in regulating serotonin syndrome. I think more commonly now it's called serotonin toxicity. But that's what serotonin syndrome is. Sorry, I don't have any insights when it comes to B12. Turn on YouTube notifications. I had COVID and am now impotent. I see nothing on the news about this. 007 the man. Well, there have been some reports. In fact, I think I talked about it on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid. You can get to it through my profile. There's evidence that in COVID patients, male COVID patients, that there's pretty substantial inflammation that occurs, I believe, in the the vas deferens or something, some component of the reproductive system, of the sperm machinery. I think that was the extent of the finding, was that there's this pretty notable, detectable inflammation of those, those parts of the body. And that could potentially have ramifications for reproductive, ability. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 prevents spermatogenesis or anything like that. And of course, as we get older, right, just not as effective at making sperm. But yeah, there have been some reports. If you're interested, I'm sure I still have the paper saved. You can reach out on Twitter and I'll send it to you. Hello, George in the UK. COVID-19 is a relatively new virus. We are learning something every day. Yeah, I mean, we're learning many things every day. It's very impressive. Basically, you have labs that were, the study that I talked about today that shows evidence that a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, causes COVID-19, can pass the blood-brain barrier, the S1 protein, they were an HIV lab. They studied HIV, and they studied, particularly they had been interested. In fact, our lab collaborated with the group who studied this dynamic, where there's evidence that in HIV, people infected with HIV, which causes AIDS, there are neurological reactions that are independent of like the immune system reaction that is, classic, HIV reaction. And there's like, severe depression can emerge, and again, it's like even if you control for like, man, I wish I didn't get HIV, that could be a little bit depressing, right? Even if you control for that, there's like evidence that the HIV virus has like direct neurological effects, and so this group basically deployed their knowledge of that to SARS-CoV-2, and lo and behold, they discovered that yes, there's evidence that this component of the SARS-CoV-2 virus can pass the blood-brain barrier. And you might say like, why is that relevant? If the whole virus can't gain access to the brain, who cares? Like, does it even do anything? Yes, it can have just that protein can have direct effects on the brain. But it also may indicate the possibility in some specific cases that actually, if this protein is able to get by the blood-brain barrier, it might mean that it enables some viral particles in some cases to gain access to the brain, in which case you're off to the races. Everyone is getting COVID. I feel left out. Yeah, the numbers are wild right now. Wild. It's like one of the things, of the many, many things that has been deeply, deeply frustrating about the COVID-19 pandemic, the many things, is that we all don't have rapid tests right now. Every American should have a case of rapid tests that you take in the morning after you brush your teeth or something. Like, they're cheap, they're easy to make, they're, literally, like, it'll cost like $5 a test or something like that, and they're basically immediate. They're sort of like pregnancy tests. We have this technology, like we have that option is available to us, and nope. Nope. It's like all of the missed opportunities, it's just frustrating. All right. Mainstream news like CNN and Fox News refuse to cover these stories. Fake news. Well, yeah, I mean, I should note that, it was just one study that I saw, and so, that is not necessarily a news story. And I think that the media has done a reasonably good job of covering COVID-19. Obviously, there's always critiques, obviously, right? But it's not like people don't know that it's happening. And so, and it would be irresponsible to, suggest, now we know that COVID-19 causes, impotence, or that this is like a totally common occurrence, that every time a guy gets this, they have to worry about this. It's just one study, and that's just not how science operates, and it's not how science media should operate. But, if you keep your eyes peeled for, it is reported by like more direct science media outlets like, Eureka Alert and, places like that. So you can check that out if you want. So do you recommend taking the vaccine? Yes, absolutely. So as a part of my job right now, I'm a science advisor to, a state government, and I'm a part of a group that does this. And a lot of us are are from biomedical science, and one of them is actually working with the Department of Health. And so, we sort of like keep our eyes peeled for when, there were reports like the big meetings with the FDA for Pfizer and Moderna, and the data were wild. Like, the data were so much better than I had expected. Nobody really knew what to expect with an mRNA virus. Just the curve of COVID-19 incidents, comparing vaccine recipients to placebo, it's just such strong data. And that it's effective in such a wide age group, that there's relatively minor adverse events, and like in the beginning, so I sympathize with, people being concerned about how rapidly this vaccine was produced. Like, it totally makes sense. It's sort of like, when you move fast, sometimes you break things, right? Like, as the famous, Silicon Valley saying goes. But, the main difference between how rapidly this all happened and how slowly it usually happens is just that essentially the U.S. government decided to just invest invest in manufacturing before we even knew if the vaccines were going to be effective. So it's not that because normally what would happen is that these companies, demonstrate that their vaccines are safe and effective, and then the FDA gives them the green light, and then the companies begin investing in production. This time what the government and these companies did is that just right in the beginning, when I'm sure they had some data, some preclinical data or something like that justified it, but they invested like $1 billion into just start making it now while we're still testing it. And at this point, like 70,000 people have been infected and inoculated, vaccinated. Way more than 70,000 people have been infected. And so we're just collapsing that wait period. And we're seeing the payoff. I mean, that is a real success story. And, of the many critiques that we all should have of the government and of, CDC and Surgeon General and, HHS and not really NIH, but this is one thing that went well, that, it's a success story. I know I have a lot of friends who are physicians, and they're all getting vaccinated because they're frontline, medical providers, and it's thrilling. This has changed our lives so fundamentally and negatively, and there hasn't been a light at the end of the tunnel since the beginning, really. And it's only gotten worse, and it's gotten much worse recently, and this is a real light at the end of the tunnel. This could finally enable us to live like normal humans again. So yes, I will get it as soon as I can. Whether it's the Moderna one, whether it's the Pfizer one, I don't care. Are you growing your hair? I'm not trying to. Funny enough, that's one of the things that I don't even have to do. It just does it for me. I'm in desperate need of a haircut. Believe me, I know, I understand. I look like, like I've been, in a coma for like 20 years. But my wife is going to cut my hair soon. So don't worry. Cool, we're getting a call from, oh my God. It looks like we are connected. I believe Claudio, right? Claudio in Brazil.
Hi, how are you, Ian?
I'm doing well. How are you, Claudio?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me. I have a question about pain and how pain is processed in the brain.
Awesome.
Like I had migraine headaches for over 20 years.
Oh.
They're now gone because I finally found a doctor who treated it and found the underlying cause of it. So I got rid of it. But,
let me ask you, if you don't mind sharing, what was the treatment?
The doctor just found out I had sinusitis that was causing the migraine.
Okay.
So I just take a anti-inflammation drug, one pill, and that's over it. I don't need more pain medicine anymore.
That's fabulous.
Anyway, yeah, but for over 20 years I had it, and I read a lot of articles about pain and about headaches and about migraine headaches, and it's very common to read suggestions that you should, once you have a headache, you should stay in a place with a little light, or dim lights or something like that, and it was always my impression based on reading. Perhaps I never paid too close of an attention, but it was always my impression that I had to go to bed and close the windows and just try to relax, etc. Then one day I read an article that was totally unrelated. It was a story about a first responder who was talking about how when they went on to help someone who had, suffered a major car accident or was burned, that the one thing they always told the person was to keep their eyes open and looking around, and that had two purposes. First, to make sure that they knew the person was conscious, etc., but also because, according to that person, if you if you close your eyes, you liberate your brain to feel more pain, because pain is a sensation that no matter where it is in your body, it needs the brain to process it. And if you open your eyes, because the eyes demand so much of your brain, it will leave less of brain power to process the pain. And that was kind of conflicting with the idea that I had, that I should shut everything down when I had a migraine, etc. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've certainly heard the recommendations for some people who have migraines to, reduce sensory stimuli in general. There are migraine is one of the major, complicated, multifaceted biomedical questions. People have migraines for different reasons, and some are, very different reasons. Like some people develop migraines, as you said, after a car accident or some kind of severe head trauma. But some people, it's brought on by specific, stimuli, specific visual stimuli. But not everybody. Other people, it's brought on by stress or by tension. And, there's even psychiatric, like in some cases, people who have been severely traumatized in their lives develop, migraines as well. And so, these are all very disparate biological phenomena. And so that's, so it wouldn't surprise me that somebody who's had experience treating migraines and they tended to have greater success by saying, close your eyes, relax, reduce, reduce your stimulation, that they would recommend that to everybody. That rationale that because so much of our brain is devoted to visual processing, which is true, it's almost like a third of our brain. It's quite a big proportion. That reduces the ability of pain sensitivity. I doubt that would be that precise explanation is 100% the explanation, just because if there's activity in one part of the brain, it doesn't prevent activity in another. Well, okay, I shouldn't say that. If there's activity, generally speaking, activity in the brain in one part doesn't preclude activity in another part. The reason that I started there was because there are in some cases, if you activate this part of the brain, then it'll inhibit another part of the brain. But just because, one sensory system, just because the brain is devoting activity to one sensory modality, it doesn't mean that it can't, detect, sensory stimuli in another modality. Rather, I suspect it's just, rather than reducing activity, literally reducing activity in pain centers, let's call them. Rather, it's just the amount of attention that you're devoting to any given sensory stimulus is altered, right? So if you close your eyes, generally speaking, if you close your eyes, you focus more on what you're hearing or maybe what you're feeling, and vice versa, right? And so I would imagine it's just and here's what I suspect it might be. This is pure speculation. So the anterior cingulate cortex is a very important part of particularly the human brain. It receives information or signals from a lot of different brain regions. It's very important to decision making and behavior and stuff like that, but also to conscious attention. And so I suspect that if you are depriving the anterior cingulate of visual information, that means that there's greater activity, greater receptivity to the other sensory modalities. It's not that there's less activity, it's not that there's less activity in those sensory modalities or, whatever. It's just that your conscious attention is diverted. And so you're just not paying as much attention to, the severity of your migraine if you're, continuing to get visual stimulation. But for me, I think that given just the diversity of different kinds of migraines, that it depends on what's causing a person's migraine. Like you for your example, right? It was essentially just an inflammatory process in your sinuses. So that would be how I would augment that model. That you're not reducing activity in pain regions. It's that you're diverting your attention a little bit from pain regions. But that's speculation, Claudio. I can't be sure.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for calling in, Claudio.
Thank you.
Claudio in Brazil. The number of people that I've met recently who have said that they suffer from migraines is it's gone up. Yeah. I don't know if there's something to that. We can still do this live on YouTube. Subscribe and turn notifications on. Yes, thank you, Joy. Twitter announced that it's going to be shuttering this platform. So if you're interested in, what I do on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid, what I do is I talk about a specific topic for like 15, 20, 25 minutes, and then, we do the live conversation. Of course, the vast majority of people with whom I speak are on this platform. But so if you're interested, go check out my YouTube. It's so you can get to it through my profile. One platform that many Periscopers are neglecting is Reddit, which has great engagement level. Yeah, I love Reddit. I actually had a subreddit for a while, and I actually do not know what's going on with that. But yeah, I love Reddit. They also have a live streaming platform too, but like you have to like pick a specific subreddit to live stream to. I just don't know which one I would do. Have you heard about the site Traitwell is offering testing your DVA COVID risk? Your DVA, I don't know what you mean by DVA, but yeah, there's a couple where you can like quantify your likely risk of COVID for any given activity. Like I'm sure a lot of people might have used that around Thanksgiving and stuff like that. But I'm not familiar with Traitwell. I'll write that down. Traitwell. Painful that I have to write. What validity, if any, it is covidforecaster.com. Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, I'll check that out. What's the difference between subconscious and conscious mind? Wombat, giraffe, zebra. It's like man, bear, pig. Well, so they're referring to different aspects of human consciousness. So it's sort of unfortunate that we use the term conscious for like conscious awareness, because consciousness is sort of like a broader term. But anyways, the main difference is that your conscious awareness is the byproduct of a small minority of your brain. The vast majority of your brain is devoted to subconscious or automatic processes with which you have no interaction. Actually, I was reminded of this very troubling condition, very rare condition. I don't even know if it's actually real, but evidently it is. There are peer-reviewed publications on it called Ondines Curse. And so one of the most interesting, here's like a great way to sort of feel the contours of the differences between your conscious awareness and your subconsciousness. Breathing. So breathing, we are fortunate, most of the time, is regulated purely subconsciously. You don't have to think about doing it. It just happens. But then when I bring it up, like, are you breathing heavily right now? Do you have shallow breaths right now? Now all of a sudden, it's part of your conscious awareness, and you're like, I don't know. Should I? Okay, remember, breathe. Right? So that's one of the very, very few things that is sort of sensitive to both conscious and subconscious regulation. But so Ondines Curse arises when somebody loses the ability for their subconscious or autonomic nervous system to regulate breathing, and so they have to consciously breathe. Could you imagine that nightmare? And what's interesting about we can talk about nicotinamide mononucleotide and nicotinamide. I think you mean probably riboside, but NAD is, we can talk about that, sure. Anyways, what do you think people who die with Ondines Curse die of? It's an interesting, it may not be what you believe it is, or what you intuitively think it might be. So I'll let you all either look it up or just guess. So once again, Ondines Curse is a condition where evidently people lose the ability for their automatic nervous system, their subconscious, to regulate breathing, and so they have to consciously focus on breathing to continue breathing. So what do you think people with that condition die of? Okay. At the level of neurons, how do... Oh, wait. So, yeah, right. So, I'm sorry. The condition die of boredom. No. Close. So subconscious is, one of the like classic heuristics for the relationship between your subconscious and your conscious awareness is like an iceberg, where the top of It's my pleasure, Sufi. The top of the iceberg, the visible part of the iceberg, is actually considerably smaller than the entirety of the iceberg, most of which is submerged. That's your subconscious. And so essentially everything that's important to you begins in the subconscious. Your mood, your access to memories, your ability to form memories. But the most important to me is your mood. And so, whenever you make a decision, there are a bunch of subconscious processes that are, that are collaborating and competing for signal dominance. And then eventually a decision bubbles up to your conscious awareness and you feel like, aha, I just made this decision. And I have this whole rationale that most of the time isn't even true. Humans are notoriously terrible at explaining their behavior. They have no insights. We have no insights into why we do the things we do. But anyways, that's part of why, because your subconscious essentially does all of the homework, does all of the work first, and then your conscious awareness takes credit for it. And so, different parts of the brain, anatomically, these are, mostly segregated. Different parts of the brain, generally speaking, more primitive parts of the brain, more evolutionarily primitive, primordial even. And generally speaking, anatomically, they are towards the back, towards the brainstem. Whereas more forebrain structures, including the anterior cingulate cortex, by the way, are generally speaking more evolutionarily new and therefore more quintessentially human and also more central to conscious awareness. Okay, so Javier brought up, at the level of neurons, how do they produce an image of a line? Okay, yeah, so that's actually fairly well characterized. And I see Deanna's here, DC Hooper 91. She is a cosmologist. She studies dark matter, dark energy, which is, as I always say, one of the coolest things you can say you study, if not also study, over in Europe. So she chats about the universe and the birth of the universe and why the universe is the way it is. So check her out, DC Hooper 91. I'm going to try and convince her to collaborate with me on YouTube. So how do neurons produce the image, an image of a line, or perception of a line? So the visual cortex, as I said earlier, essentially the occipital lobe, is gigantic relative to other parts of the brain devoted to a specific task. Approximately a third of our brain is devoted to vision, which is why we are so our sensory sensitivities and our sensory awareness is so dominated by vision. We're driven by vision. Similarly to the way that a mouse or a dog has vastly superior olfactory sensitivity, particularly a dog. The human olfactory system is like this shriveled little embarrassing nothing, right? Even though obviously smell is very, very important, and smell is really interesting. It has its own unique anatomical projections that project directly to limbic system structures. Very, very interesting. But anyways, vision is by far the most important, whereas olfaction is the most important for dogs and mice and a lot of other mammals. And also why pheromones are so much more relevant to those other mammals. For humans, it is vision, and I frankly think it's a superior sensory system because, of course, vision is based on the movement of photons, and photons move a lot more rapidly than chemicals floating through some substrate like the air. So anyway, so the way the occipital lobe, the way the visual cortex is organized, is in layers. We have different layers that decipher different aspects of the patterns of photons that are splashing up against the photoreceptors in our eyes. And so, some layers are devoted to color. Some layers are devoted to just the presence of light. Some layers are devoted to, shapes of, photons hitting up against our eyeballs, right? And, some neurons literally only fire when they're exposed to a horizontal line or a diagonal line or a vertical line, everywhere in between. And then also there are neurons that only fire in response to a diagonal line that's moving sideways, right? And so it's this very, very precise, almost topographic, not really, but very precise relationship between the architecture of the occipital lobe and the patterns of photons that splash up against our retinas. So that's how. And so when those neurons fire, you perceive a line. Depending on which of those neurons, I can't remember which layer it is. I think it's it's one of the earlier layers. And I should say these layers, those signals, that stimuli from your eyes travel to the occipital lobe through a bunch of structures in the middle. And then essentially the occipital lobe, deciphers or processes the pattern of photons progressively. And so, it first starts out simple, ends up more complicated. And that's part of the reason, I would argue, for why when people take a hallucinogenic drug like LSD or psilocybin, and there's spontaneous activity in the occipital lobe, that's why there are these artificial frequently geometric perceptions, sensory perceptions, because those neurons are not only firing when they're actually exposed to those photons, but rather they're just spontaneously firing. That's also why you can have visual experiences in dreams when your eyes are closed, because those neurons are firing on their own, automatically, intrinsically, and so therefore you get visual perception. So that's how. I love it. That's like old school neuroscience. Okay, so Trump has less or a lot of neurons. I bet about the same number as pretty much everybody else. Hey, Tom's Philosophy. What? How long has it been? I feel like it has been a very long time, hasn't it? Cool. Oh, wow. I'm so behind. I'm so sorry. So what is COVID-19 major risk allele? My DNA is negative for it, and my risk severity is 10% COVID-19. So I'll have to check that out. I'm not quite sure what that means by risks severity. And right now, so first of all, COVID-19 does not intercalate with your DNA, right? It's not like HIV. It's not a retrovirus, so it doesn't, become part of your cell's genome. But what you might be referring, the thing to which you might be referring is that there may be one explanation for why there are such disparate reactions and severity to COVID-19. There's a bunch of different potential options or potential explanations, and it could be one or more of them altogether. But it is very widely appreciated now that some people, when they're exposed and infected by COVID-19, they don't even know, right? They barely know. Maybe they have like a tickle at the back of their throat, or they cough a few times and that's it, but they're still, potentially, they can still transmit the virus. And then of course there's some people who have a rather severe cold, right? Cold symptoms, rather severe flu. That happened to one of my friends, actually, fairly recently. And, but he said, it was basically, reminiscent of the worst cold I ever had, but then he got better and he's fine now, quarantined from his family and everything. But then there's people who die, obviously, a lot of people, unfortunately, tragically. And then there's, people who have these months long hauler symptoms that go on and on and on. And then, of course, there are the things that I talked about on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid, the loss of smell, the loss of taste, the loss or stroke, dizziness, seizure, vomiting, these types of things. And so, right, and blood type numbers are skewed towards A-type bloods. Yeah, so that theory, let's talk about blood type in a sec. So, what is the reason for these disparate reactions? One, which I think is probably going to be part of the story, one is that it depends on the dose of virus exposure, or the inoculum, I believe is what it's called. Where, if you're exposed, it takes like a certain minimum number of viral particles to infect enough cells in your body for you to, become sick. And it's actually reasonably high, but also it spreads very, very effectively. So it's easy to achieve that minimum, that threshold. But anyways, if you're exposed to, let's say, 100 viral particles, these are just complete, silly, speculative numbers, right? They don't reflect accurately necessarily the actual numbers of the virus, but let's just say you're exposed to 100 viral particles and you get sick. There might be a meaningful substantive difference between that and somebody who's exposed to 10,000 viral particles or 1,000 viral particles because they were sitting next to somebody at a bar or at a restaurant or whatever, at the dinner table, and somebody was just breathing on them, right? And they're like laughing and they're coughing and drinking and blah, 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 right? They just get a much bigger dose. And so it might just be the case that, like, if you are just bombarded with COVID-19 viral particles, you're going to have a more severe reaction. That is the case with some other viruses. So there's that. But there could also be, we know that, at least we're fairly certain that an important part of why COVID-19 can be so dangerous for some people is the complement system. So this is like a part of the immune system that you almost never hear about. It's part of the innate immune system, and it's sort of one of the weapons, one of the weapon systems, one of the battalions of our immune system. And there it just might be the case that COVID-19 elicits a complement, and it's not complement, it's complement, might elicit there might be some genetic polymorphism that renders the complement systems in some people more sensitive to COVID-19 than other people. There could just be short nucleotide polymorphisms that make that the case. Could also be that, the way that so the point is that there's a bunch of potential explanations for this. It could also be as simple as like slightly different strains of the virus, right? We know there's many different strains. Generally speaking, fairly confident that those slight changes have not proven to be functionally important. That you change this or that. It's sort of like if you're looking at a Christmas tree and you change an ornament. You swap it out for another ornament. Guess what? It's still a Christmas tree and it still has an ornament, right? And so it's not, functionally different. But if you were to replace, the bottom of a Christmas tree with a hamburger, now you have something weird, right? Now you have a different thing. So that's sort of how I've seen it conveyed. And also COVID-19 actually does not mutate very rapidly at all, which is great news. That's great news for the vaccine because just like measles, for example, measles has been around forever. And we've had a vaccine forever. And because measles essentially never really functionally changes, we haven't had to make new measles vaccines. So that may be the case with COVID-19. So, yeah. Hamburger under a tree. That's my favorite Christmas present. It seems to have disparate reactions as polio used to. Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen that comparison. Interesting. Do you have an estimate yet for the inoculum? Yeah, I mean... I'm using the number 100 because I actually believe I've read that somewhere, but don't quote me on that. Hey, Salvatore. I think it's been a while, hasn't it? Good to see you, man. Are you familiar with the photon experiments of the 1930s and 40s? The double slit experiment, maybe. I don't know if that was in the 30s and 40s, though. I actually don't know when those experiments happened. I bet Deanna knows. How did Trump get rid of COVID so quick? Well, keep in mind, so a couple reasons. Keep in mind that, people react very differently to COVID-19. Some people, again, don't even know that they ever had it. Could very well, that's part of the reason that I would wish that we had antibody tests more widely available. But even more important is just we should all have rapid tests in our bathroom next to our toothbrush that we take every, 5 days or whatever. It is just, malfeasance. It is just inexcusable that we don't. The technology is out there. Like, literally, these tests exist. People have them in their hands. And so they should just be deployed. You should be able to get it mailed to you from your post office or something. It's not perfect, right? But it's better than nothing. And particularly since I suspect that people would be more willing to take one of those tests. People that hate masks, that have for some reason associated masks with their freedom, their personal liberty, and all this kind of stuff, as opposed to it being your patriotic duty to protect your fellow Americans. I suspect that the barrier for them would be lower for the test. Sure, I'll take a test. I don't care, particularly if you're just handing it to me. Have you a kid? No, I haven't. And it's kind of frustrating that the FDA seems, and a lot of the people that make these decisions seem to be very focused on having these more complicated tests, like PCR-based tests, as the standard. And I understand that it is more technically precise and accurate, but that's not the question isn't, have you ever been exposed to COVID-19? At least not for this specific question. Rather, it's, are you a risk? Could you affect people around you? That's the question. So, anyways, it's something I've been thinking about. Oh, yeah, so how did Trump get rid of it so quickly? So, again, there's this wide disparity in how people react. Some people react very, very, very severely and pass away. Families have been changed forever by that. But then there's plenty of people who just get it, plenty more people who get it and recover. So there's that. But the second thing is that Donald Trump went to Walter Reed, and he was treated by some of the most attentive. So, right. So, there was some clinician, probably multiple clinicians, with their eyeballs on his vitals at every second that he was there. I guarantee you that. And if you go to the hospital, you are not going to get that attention. They just can't. They physically can't do it. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough manpower, people power to do that. And so you're not going to benefit from that level of vigilance. Secondly, he got the most cutting edge treatments. Maybe, the Regeneron antibody cocktail or whatever it was. We're not entirely sure how effective that is. Hello, Dark Swan. We're not sure how effective that is. But maybe it made a difference. And so, he was the beneficiary of very, very vigilant medical care, very, very skilled, brilliant, accomplished medical care, the best physicians in this country, certainly, if not, some of the best in the world. And so if you think that you're going to have that experience if you go to the hospital, you're sorely mistaken. Like, it's just not going to be that way. So, yeah. All right. Triptan drugs to help migraine. Yeah, during a migraine, if it causes vomiting, the vomiting helps. So, Sass Bridget, yeah, so triptan drugs are like the frontline treatment for migraine. I believe still, even though we have some new treatments like Aimovig that target the CGRP protein, which evidently is quite important to some people's migraines. Yes. Let's see. How have you gotten rid of the pain, vomiting, etc.? Shriveled. Yeah. How is the virus itself socially paralyzing? Oh, Sufi, yeah. Never thought psychology would be impacted by a virus. It is word seeing a neuroscientist talking on COVID. Weird. Why do you say that? I made viruses. Like, I literally made viruses for not to infect people, but to conduct studies. Obviously, I'm not an optimal resource for knowledge on virus. You should go to, particularly if you're concerned about public health decisions and stuff like that, go to your local your city's public health Department of Public Health. They'll have better ideas of the current numbers and these kinds of things. But and then obviously CDC, FDA, they've sort of gotten their act together a little bit. There's, Eric Topol, I think, has been very insightful on COVID-19, more insightful than a lot of people. Ed Yong, he's a journalist. He's one of the best science journalists, I think, in the world. He's a great resource. Who's the other guy? Gosh, I just click on their handles on Twitter these days, so I don't remember their names. But Eric Topol is very insightful. And so when it comes to how a virus could affect the brain, I mean, there are many viruses, not many, but there are viruses and parasites that affect the brain. Rabies probably is the most infamous. If you've never seen a video of somebody who is suspected of having been infected with rabies, you can find it on YouTube. I think there's a video of a gentleman in Hanoi who developed rabies. Rabies is an extraordinarily dangerous virus. And essentially it's like you begin behaving like a zombie, and you lose all control of your sort of bodily functions and your voluntary motor activity, and that's just one example. But probably one of the more, there's a whole subculture devoted to Toxoplasma gondii or toxoplasmosis, and that's a parasite, and there's certainly animal evidence that it dramatically changes risk-seeking behavior in mice and rats, and then also in humans. There's evidence that there's a very strangely high proportion of people diagnosed with schizophrenia who have toxoplasmosis. There's I believe there was a study of victims of motor vehicle accidents, specifically motorcycles, I believe, where there's an unusually high percentage of people with toxoplasmosis gondii. By the way, generally speaking, you get toxoplasmosis from cats, if you have pet cats. Okay, Cosmic Rose, sorry to be late. Did you already discuss the new strains in the UK and Europe causing transportation shutdown now in UK, Netherlands, Italy, and more? Euromeister was just reporting on them. Yeah. So I saw the reporting, and I haven't seen any evidence that there's a dramatic functional difference between this novel strain and and let's just call it the preliminary strain. Evidently, it's sort of most densely transmitted in sort of London and around London. But I have not seen any evidence that it equates to more rapid spread. Maybe that evidence does exist. I just haven't seen it. I was focused on this S1 protein. Speaking of how viruses can affect the brain, the study that I just talked about on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid, focuses on the potential or the apparent ability of a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, S1 protein, part of the spike protein, to gain access, to bypass the blood-brain barrier, which is sort of like one of the primary, modes of protection of the central nervous system. The ability of this protein to bypass the blood-brain barrier, suggesting that it can interact with things in the brain. We don't know what those interactions might be, but it also potentially suggests that the viral particle itself, the entire thing, might, in some cases, if this one protein of the viral particle can interact with whatever it needs to get through the blood-brain barrier, that means that the viral particle might be able to get through. So that's another example of potential viral interaction with the brain. And I also mentioned HIV. HIV is known to have direct ramifications for the central nervous system in the brain, including depression, anxiety, these types of things, independently of its effects on the immune system. And as time has gone on, I think that the field has very rapidly developed an appreciation for the relationship between the immune system and the brain. For a long time, the brain, and it is considered to be immunoprivileged. There are a couple parts of the body that are immunoprivileged: your eyes, your reproductive organs like your testes or your, I believe, ovaries, are essentially protected in the same way as the brain is, which is also immunoprivileged because of that blood-brain barrier, which is really just composed of blood vessel cells that compose blood vessels that are packed so tightly together that there aren't these little gaps called fenestrations, which are present throughout the rest of the circulatory system that enable things to get in and out of the circulatory system, including lymphocytes. There's a direct relationship there. Interesting. I had a heat stroke with acute kidney failure back in July. Oh wow! I wondered if I should close my eyes and let my body focus on the problem, or looking around while the medics worked on me. Jordan, wow. Jeez, I'm sorry to hear that. Heat stroke. Yeah, actually, I remember playing football in high school. There was a guy. I was in Miami. Absurd, and we had football practice. We called them 2-a-days, 2 times a day, in the hot sun, in Miami. It was just like doing push-ups in a sauna. It was just like, or doing laps in a sauna. It was just awful. And one kid had I don't know if it would technically be a heat stroke, but yeah, it's scary. I'm sorry to hear that, man. Okay. Canada, where they have made a legal exception for hate speech. Could you please advise if there is a way to get rid of terrible pain and nausea with my migraines? Well, the first thing I would do, if you were a member of my family and you brought that up, I would suggest that you go talk to a physician about that. I'm assuming that you've been diagnosed with migraines. Otherwise, it may not be migraine. It may be something even more troubling. For example, a tumor could cause those types of symptoms. You told him that. Thank you, Joy. But it could be other things. It could be seizures. So I would suggest you talk to a physician about that. All right, neurogenesis. We can talk about that. Nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide mononucleotide. So, and my pleasure, Sufi. So, these are essentially, let's call them substances. They're molecules. I've actually talked about them on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid, where I talked about a company called Elysium, as well as a company called Chromadex. And it's an interesting story, only partly because of the interesting biology under these behind these substances. But basically, these are molecules that are sort of like prodrugs, kind of. They're sort of precursors to a molecule called NAD. And NAD sort of, you can think of it sort of like ATP. It's a different pathway, but it's a molecule that can essentially power biochemical events. They power different sort of parts of cells, but and ATP is still a little bit more important, but ATP is adenosine triphosphate. That's like the main energy source for cells, right? The main reason that you even eat food, whatever kind of food you eat, is to make ATP. And a lot of our life is devoted to ATP. So NAD is kind of similar. Whoa. Okay. So nicotinamide riboside and nicotinamide mononucleotide are both precursors to NAD. And so there's evidence in, preclinical evidence, there's evidence in everything from nematodes, C. elegans, to worms, to mice, I believe dogs, or maybe it was just rats. It was a bigger organism than mice, that the lifespan of these organisms could be expanded quite a bit by supplementing their diets with nicotinamide, I believe mononucleotide. I think they tested them both. Anyway, so one of the main sort of pioneers of this field is named David Sinclair. He's a scientist at Harvard, a geneticist at Harvard. He's actually the chair of their genetics of aging department or something like that, one of the billion departments they have at Harvard. And he's actually, if you were to look at him, and here's why I covered it on YouTube, because there's just a lot of interesting things to look at. But if you were to look at him, I wish I could show you. I don't think I still have it on OBS, because I could just bring it up on, let's see. No, I don't. Darn. All right. Anyways, if you were to look at a picture of this guy, you'd be like, oh, wow, he's so young to have achieved, he's an Australian guy, to have achieved this much success in science. He's just a litany of awards and stuff. And he's actually in his 50s. Not that that's old or anything, but he looks like he's in his maybe early 30s. So it is just one of those things where it's I wonder if he's onto something. I'm skeptical that it has anything to do with nicotinamide mononucleotide. He also takes, what is that? Jeez. Not Lipitor. What's the other one? Anyways, a diabetes drug. Cannot believe I'm forgetting. That is so frustrating. Anyways, so he does a couple of other things. He makes his own yogurt too. Anyways, he has a company called Elysium, and it is a partnership with a group over at MIT. Leonard Guarente, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He's a professor at MIT. They both are age-related scientists, and their whole approach is, they're in the field of longevity, right? They're interested in extending human lifespan and health span. But that's an extremely challenging field, because apart from doing these animal studies, because mice live, about a year, 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, they reproduce really quickly. Worms and nematodes, they reproduce super quickly. And so, if you're interested in whether or not a treatment extended their life, it's still a long time. You still have to wait 2 years, but you don't have to wait 75, 85, 95, 105 years like the lifespan of a human, potentially longer if you're successful in promoting longevity and health span. So their approach, instead of trying to do a clinical trial, which is what the standard approach would be, their approach is to set up a supplement company called Elysium, from which you can subscribe to get their longevity. They don't actually even market it as a longevity thing. They call it, whatever, health promoting. But it's a supplement, so it's not regulated like a drug. So they could call it whatever they wanted, really, so long as it's not poison. And take the profits from the sales of those supplements and then pipe that into development. Metformin, thank you so much, Joy. Pipe that revenue into research and development. It's a different model. It's not a model that's been really done by anybody else. And it's interesting. So anyways, if you're interested in that, you can check it out on my YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid. All right. Yeah. So metformin was a diabetes drug that I was mentioning. I did a whole episode on metformin. Metformin is really interesting. It's actually inspired by a compound from the French lilac. Kind of nice. Okay. How does COVID impact psychology? Well, so, it depends on what precisely you mean. So, indirectly, of course, it has tremendous ramifications. The statistics we're seeing, particularly of substance use disorders in the era of COVID, have been alarming. I talked about this as well on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid. You can get to it from my profile. But anyways, specifically drug overdose fatalities. So in the United States, we had an epidemic before we had the pandemic, right? We had the drug overdose epidemic. Opioid addiction and opioid overdose fatalities also, are driving a lot of it attributable to fentanyl, by the way, specifically fentanyl, but not only. So
basically, in 2017, we reached about 70,000, a bit over 70,000 drug overdose fatalities, the highest ever in the history of the country. And then in 2018, it went down a little bit. It went down to like 68, I think, 68,000. It's still a, tragically massive number of people, don't get me wrong, but it began going down. And then the CDC has like this really useful tool where they collect provisional data. They collect data from, as rapidly as they can. And, they don't really like scrutinize it super closely. They just like report it after, evaluating it for a little bit. But that's what they call it, provisional. And you can check. You can, check on the trends over time. And so from March of 2019 to March of 2020, something like 74,000 people were lost to drug overdose fatalities. And that was the highest ever in history. And then in April of 2019 to April of 2020, that number has gone up to 76,000. So, that is a fairly rapid increase. And we also know that just rates of substance use, just alcohol use alone, legal substance, easier to get, has gone way up. And so also, interestingly, I believe there was a study in Canada, I think it was Canada, or it might have been the UN, that found that over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been borderline shortages of benzodiazepine medications, of a couple different medications, but benzodiazepines included, which is, that is just one of these very indirect indicators of, what might be, why might there be a shortage? It's not for lack of production. So it's just being used more. It's being, redirected more, perhaps. So, there's just all these little symbol or signs, indications that people are struggling. Psychiatrically, they're struggling. And, I certainly you don't have to convince me very much that, the just botched response to COVID-19 in general. And of course, the effects on people who lose family members, lose loved ones to COVID-19, and you can't even visit them while they're gonna pass away. You can't even see them. That's tragic. And so there's all those indirect, mechanisms, or whatever, ways that it can affect people psychiatrically. But of course, now that there has been evidence that, so for example, mRNA from SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, has been found in cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, which is essentially like the tear-like fluid that bathes your brain and your spinal cord. So mRNA, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 mRNA has been found in CSF. And if something is in CSF, that pretty much means that it either used to be in the brain or it's going to the brain, one or the other. And so that was one earlier indication. There's also indication that the earlier, like SARS, the earlier coronavirus that caused SARS, had been detected in the central nervous systems of people who had passed away. So, point two. And then now this paper that I just talked about on YouTube, youtube.com/anthropoid, there's evidence that a part of the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus, has been detected in the central nervous system. So there could be very direct, mechanism by which COVID-19 affects, the brain and therefore psychology. And then, of course, there's plenty of evidence that, people, some people lose the ability to smell or taste. I personally know people who have experienced that. And then there's, confusion, dementia-like symptoms. That is, classic neurological symptoms, stroke. There's a bunch, dizziness, confusion again, confusion. And anyways, so yeah, there's a variety of ways. This is not a virus you want to catch. It's just not. It's not the flu. The flu is also a pretty dangerous virus, but it's not the flu. It's not a cold. For some people, it is a pivotal moment in their lives their life will never be the same. Could you please? Oh yeah, right. Okay, sorry about that. Whoa, am I super behind? Something going on your end? It's so cool when people see each other that they know. The human isolation is tragic. Yeah, Hal, I totally agree. And it's tragic in multiple ways. Like, I have a daughter who's almost 2 years old now. She's just a couple weeks actually, and she's this brilliant little ball of energy, and she normally would have been playing with other kids, a lot of other kids by now, developing those social skills, being made fun of, being, whatever, being mean, being nice, I'm sure she would just be nice, but like, experiencing that human feedback so you can begin to grow. Now, evidently, that becomes most critical at around 3 years old, a little bit older, maybe. But still, she's undoubtedly missing out, and she's not the only one. She's kids across the country who, for no good reason, just have been deprived of that social interaction. And, we're primates. We need social interaction. We need it in ways that aren't even apparent. So, my wife lost her father to COVID-19. Wow, Daryl, I don't think I'd known that. Sorry to hear that, dude. Jeez. It's terrible. Let me cook your brain, bro. Be my guest. Be my guest. For migraines, I found that the self-massage of the nerves at the very base of the skull helps with it. For me, that just always feels good. So it wouldn't surprise me. Oh, yeah. Awesome. Deanna, thanks for joining. Have a good one. And I'll talk to you soon. Oh, and Sherry, thank you so much for the super hearts. I'm sorry I didn't see that. Appreciate that. What exactly is COVID-19? Is that like a cold or something? It is sort of. So COVID-19 is the name for the disease that's caused by SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 is a viral particle that is in the coronavirus family of viruses. And, you might have heard of SARS. That was a coronavirus outbreak in the early 2000s. You might probably not have heard of MERS, MERS. That was a coronavirus outbreak in the 2010s. And now we have COVID-19, which, it seems like we're on a 10-year cycle with coronaviruses that essentially evolve in what are called reservoir species. We, think, bats are frequently a reservoir species. Pangolins, which are the coolest little animals. I didn't know about pangolins until COVID-19. They're so cool. And tragically, they're being poached a lot. They basically have like fingernails for scales all down their body. They're so cool. Anyways, and so, these animals live in conditions where they're very, very tightly, close to each other. Well, particularly bats are very, very close to each other. And, it's not like they're washing their hands and taking showers, right? And, they eat various foods and, that aren't necessary. They're exposed to various pathogens and stuff like that. And so as a result, viruses can evolve in them. And then, bats are one of these animals that interface with humans in some way. You don't have to eat a bat for it to happen. You just have to be exposed to one, or to the products of one, right? The bodily fluids, let's call it, gross, of a bat. And then you can have what's called a zoonotic transmission, where you have a virus that was present in another animal that then begins to infect humans. And so that's essentially what SARS-CoV-2 is. It's different from SARS-CoV-1, the one that caused SARS, the initial outbreak. In a couple of ways, it seems to be able to infect a wider variety of cells in the body, not just lower respiratory cells. It seems that it can infect both lower and upper respiratory cells, and then also potentially other cells throughout the body, just because there was a slight, the reason that we call it something else, the reason it's a different virus is that the part of the virus that enables it to bind to things in general is slightly different from SARS-CoV-1, which probably is what enables it to have a wider tropism or wider ability to bind stuff. Why do you take so long to get a vaccine? I've never heard that. The production of these vaccines has been remarkably rapid. I mean, unprecedented by far. Faster than arguably the most optimistic projections were. Faster even than Dr. Fauci was optimistically anticipating. These people deserve some kind of prize that whether it's a lot of money or whether it's like something made out of gold, because this is unprecedented. We are very, very fortunate to live in an era where we've invested enough in basic biomedical research in this country that we were just cocked and ready to just deploy all of this knowledge so fast. And rather than 10 years waiting for a vaccine, we're getting it in 10 months. That is nuts. And it's already in 70,000 people. That's a huge number of people. So do you think fast tracking the vaccine will show holes in long-term effects? So will show. I'm not sure what you mean by holes, but you mean are we concerned about long-term effects of viruses, right? Or I'm sorry, long-term effects of vaccines. So there's a reason that the FDA picked. Most people didn't think there would be a vaccine due to mutation of the virus. It was amazing. Yeah. And I mean, so SARS-CoV-2 doesn't seem to mutate as rapidly as, let's say, the influenza virus, which does mutate very rapidly, which is why you need a new flu vaccine every year. SARS-CoV-2 has what's essentially called editing capabilities. It has a component of its own genome that is able to, essentially surveil for mistakes in replication, which are what cause, mutations and evolution of the virus. But anyways, yeah, of course, that was a concern. It still is a concern, but evidently, there's a good reason to believe that we may be looking at like a measles type situation where it hasn't evolved or mutated in many, many, many years. So we don't have to get new measles vaccines all the time, right? It might be kind of a similar situation. Not necessarily. It might be the kind of thing where we're going to need to get, COVID-19 vaccines every 2 years or something like that. Who knows? Hopefully not. But anyways, yeah. So, yeah. Feel like I was going somewhere else with that. You have to excuse me. Oh, right. All right. Oh, yeah. So usually vaccine production takes years. Oh, right. Long-term effects of the vaccine. So there's a reason that the FDA picked 2 months. Evidently, for most vaccines, long-term effects of vaccination, manifest at 2 months or by 2 months. And, generally speaking, there's just not a lot of evidence to suggest that you need that there is a cause for concern that you'll see an effect many, many, many months down the line that you didn't see at 2 months. So yeah, I mean, of course, it's going to be the kind of thing that there's a reason that the government is really trying to pressure Pfizer I believe Pfizer to just continue their monitoring of this clinical trial because that's always possible, right? As scientists, you don't ever say never, right? But you just have to make decisions based off of the evidence available to you, and that's what they've done. I've personally, from my little soapbox, I've been rather critical of the FDA. I think they made a lot of pretty specific mistakes, but this one, I think they deserve credit. I think Steve Hahn is still the commissioner of the FDA. I think he deserves credit for that. All right, we're getting a call. Where's my book? Everybody calm down. All right, looks like we're connected, Jimmy. Where are you calling from?
I've actually seen your scopes in the past and really enjoy your insights. So it's great to be on. I'm actually in London right now.
Oh, cool. Interesting. So what's on your mind?
What kind of chair are you in? I almost thought you were in a wheelchair, so I was concerned.
No, I finally, because I was working from home, like exclusively these days, I finally went from a $30 chair to a much better chair. It's one of the few things I invested in. So it's like an ergonomic chair. I got on Amazon.
Oh, that's great. Where are you at right now? Looks like you're outside. Is it dark where you're at?
I'm in Philadelphia.
Gotcha. Wow, it's already dark there.
Yeah. Yeah, so
I've actually come in before. I believe I talked to you in the beginning of the pandemic, but I'm also a therapist.
Oh, okay. So do you provide treatment in London?
What was that?
Do you practice in London or do you practice in the States?
Yeah, I practice in London and I have a primary office, and then was actually in New York for about 13 years, and then went over to London, and before that was actually working on the southern coast of France. So it's been nice to get around and meet people from all over the world, obviously. So it's been a pretty great journey. Yeah,
you've picked some really wonderful places to live. But so how has your practice been over the course of the pandemic in London?
It's been okay. Like anybody in the beginning, I was concerned, but just doing the whole mask thing, and I was actually able to get in some good sessions with people over Zoom. So, been really a savior, I think, for a lot of industries right now. But that's been a pleasant surprise, and it makes me wonder going forward if we're going to continue to maybe have this be somewhat of a norm, and maybe only for more serious things coming in person, or this is opening up a wide spectrum of what could or could not be going forward. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I've heard several people in various kinds of psychotherapy speculate the same way. I remember early on, right when it was COVID was really taking off in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is like one of the, if not the epicenter of the opioid overdose epidemic.
Yeah.
And there were reports by people who provide addiction treatment that they had transitioned to doing almost exclusively remote, and they said it seemed to be pretty successful, that like abstinence rates were pretty good, if not elevated, and so that's encouraging, and that certainly would make it much easier to provide treatment for people
Exactly.
who just can't or for whatever reason can't get therapy. But yeah, that's interesting.
There's been a big epidemic in London, and I believe in Wales as well, where people, I don't know what's going on with the drug usage and what's going on with the opiates. I know with fentanyl and cocaine, they've been kind of mixing those, a lot of increase in overdoses, as you're aware. But there's been something going on with European distribution, and people just can't seem to get down to the bottom of it, because when I started off this profession, I was with chronic addicts and people in the prison systems. And lately, what I've been hearing and reading about, which is very disturbing actually, almost just as much as the pandemic, is I'm hearing people are doing this rectally now, and the overdose rate is a lot higher. But there's also a violence to it when they're distributing the Narcan and whatnot. They wake up and there's an anger and a violence, and they think that there might be a mixture of bath salts in these, because there actually is, believe it or not, like people are trying to bite people, cannibalism. It's actually well documented, and it's very frightening, the amount of violence that's going into this. And there's been actually some deaths, a high amount of deaths, because of COVID and whatnot. It's not really brought to the
Right.
what you would call the foresight of things. So I encourage you to look at that, because I think it's really going to affect what we do.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing. I know that the UK is like unusually fond of ketamine as well. That's like
Yes,
yeah.
ketamine's really growing, and there's a big growing. Like I said, they're distributing it or taking it rectally.
Right,
And,
right.
There's a lot of guys in the circle. I'm not sure if you heard of Adams Square in London. It's a very popular poetry and coffee kind of circle there, and people are just waking up from these tirades, and there's like the cannibalism, the violence, and just a lot of butt fucking going on, and fucking young gay boys, and it's just getting out of control with.
Right. Wow, that was a good troll, man. That was good. That was impressive. All right, hats off to you. That was yeah. His voice was just so like sounded like Jimmy Pardo, didn't he? Anyways, very funny. But hey, I mean, a lot of what that took some commitment. Yeah, man. I was sort of skeptical that like a therapist would be successful in London with that accent. Like, I just suspect that that you're not going to get a lot of patients who are like, oh, for sure, I want this kind of accent. This like lounge comedian voice. He has a serious jerk voice. Yeah, he just sounded like Jimmy Pardo. I mean, Jimmy Pardo does it as like an affectation, I think. But what he was saying was largely true. Like I've heard that ketamine is very widely used. I know cocaine is quite popular in the UK, and there has been a proliferation, like bath salts. I don't even know if people are still using that term anymore. But there has been a proliferation of synthetic cannabinoids. I mean, I know I happen to know that like, particularly throughout prison systems, synthetic cannabinoids are very, very, much more common than they ever had been, and it caught people overdose, and they experience psychosis, and they have to be hospitalized, and so yeah, he took notes. That was good. That was good. Jimmy Donovan. That is also like a comedian name. Hats off, Jimmy. Good one. I look forward to your next troll. I wonder if he's really a therapist. That would be very funny if he was really a therapist. That would be very funny. Yeah. Friend of Timothy Leary's. I thought that was legit. Yeah, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. That is the most successful troll I've had. Yeah, there's just like a lot of reasonable claims. But yeah, the voice was a bit of a tell. You meet with your psychiatrist over Zoom. Oh, that's good. Yeah. I've heard stories of some people's physicians just being so reckless and demanding people come into their office to get prescriptions and stuff like that. And it's just like, get with the program, you know? I might be too patient. When he started with the booty bump thing. Well, but that is also a thing. Like, people do that, you know? Like, rectal administration, believe it or not, is a very efficient way to administer a substance. Because the main reason, if you're interested, first of all, obviously it's a very vascularized area, but the reason is that the colon, that area is not remotely as acidic as your stomach compartment, right? So when you take any drug orally, one of the central challenges in medicinal chemistry is to be able to make a drug that can survive the very severe differences between how acidic the stomach is and how alkaline the intestinal system is. And so if you can just bypass that initial acidity, you're gonna get away with a lot less of the drug being ionized and then therefore eliminated. So yeah, I mean, that is also true. Like, people do that with ketamine, with the substances he was mentioning. So I suspect maybe he has some insider knowledge, maybe. All right, let me check and see where we are at. What's happening here? What's going on? All right, I should probably call it a day. So if you haven't heard, Twitter's going to be shuttering Periscope. So if you would like to continue having these live conversations, and also I do specific topics on YouTube, you can find me at youtube.com/anthropoid, and there's a link to it in my profile. And I cover things like COVID-19 in the brain, but also dreams, Neuralink, whole brain computer interfaces, the effects of various drugs, addiction, all these topics. And so if you're interested, youtube.com/anthropoid. Of course, you can always reach out on Twitter @_anthropoid. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next week. Have a good week. Are we all right? And so thank you so much, everybody on YouTube. I appreciate you joining me live. If you haven't subscribed and you enjoy this content, I would appreciate it if you would, prod the subscribe button. Prod it, tickle it, probe it, smash it, kick it, love it. All right, I'll let you go. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. See you next time.